It was one of those early summer Saturdays in Maplewood Springs, the kind where the air felt light and hopeful, sunlight filtering through the tall oak trees that lined every street, and the smell of freshly cut grass drifted lazily from one yard to the next, promising nothing but peace, or so I thought. My daughter, Lily, had been up since sunrise, her excitement bubbling over because today was the neighborhood fun run, a little tradition the HOA put together each year, and for the first time since her accident 3 years ago, the one that left her with permanent nerve damage in her right leg. She was going to compete, not for a medal, not for attention, but simply to prove to herself that she could. She was only 12, small for her age, with a determined sparkle in her green eyes and a stubborn streak that had carried her through endless physical therapy sessions when most kids would have given up. And that morning, as I watched her lace up her sneakers at the kitchen table, I felt a swelling pride in my chest that almost made me forget how tense things had been lately. We'd had our share of trouble with neighbors, especially with Mrs. Patricia Mallory, the one everyone in the HOA quietly referred to as Karen. When she wasn't around, a woman in her late 40s with a sharp, permanent scowl, always in some pastel cardigan, who seemed to believe that every square inch of the neighborhood was hers to police. She'd already complained about Lily running too fast down the sidewalk during her training, muttering something about unsafe behavior, but I brushed it off as her usual nitpicking. Patricia always needed something to be upset about, and we'd learned to live with it. Still, as Lily and I walked toward the park that morning, her limp barely noticeable after months of hard work, I noticed Patricia across the street, arms crossed, standing next to her son, Ryan, a tall, broad-shouldered boy of 13 with an air of arrogance that made you wonder if he'd been raised to believe the sun rose just for him. And the look she gave Lily wasn't one of neighborly encouragement, but something closer to disdain, as though my daughter's presence in the race was somehow an insult. I told myself to ignore it, focusing instead on the happy chaos of the park, kids in colorful t-shirts darting around, parents chatting over coffee, the sound of someone's Bluetooth speaker playing upbeat pop songs, and the volunteers from the HOA checking in runners at a long, folding table. Lily went to warm up with a few gentle stretches, her focus intense, and I hung back near the benches, my eyes sweeping the scene like they always did. Ever since the accident, I couldn't help scanning for potential hazards, for anything that could hurt her again. That's when I caught a brief exchange between Patricia and Ryan, her leaning down, whispering something in his ear, his eyes flicking toward Lily with a flash of something that didn't sit right with me. Not fear, not amusement, but a sharp, mean sort of interest. The race wasn't for another half hour, but already I felt a strange unease creeping in, a sense that today wasn't going to be the simple, joyful victory I'd imagined. Lily came jogging back, over, cheeks flushed, telling me she'd timed herself on the practice lap and was faster than she'd ever been. And I smiled, telling her how proud I was, but somewhere deep down, a knot was tightening in my stomach. And the first time all morning, I noticed just how many people were watching her, not with admiration, but with that quiet, calculating curiosity that made you wonder what they were waiting for. It was one of those early summer Saturdays in Maplewood Springs, the kind where the air felt light and hopeful, sunlight filtering through the tall oak trees that lined every street, and the smell of freshly cut grass drifted lazily from one yard to the next, promising nothing but peace, or so I thought. My daughter, Lily, had been up since sunrise, her excitement bubbling over because today was the neighborhood fun run, a little tradition the HOA put together each year. And for the first time since her accident 3 years ago, the one that left her with permanent nerve damage in her right leg, she was going to compete, not for a medal, not for attention, but simply to prove to herself that she could. She was only 12, small for her age, with a determined sparkle in her green eyes and a stubborn streak that had carried her through endless physical therapy sessions when most kids would have given up. And that morning, as I watched her lace up her sneakers at the kitchen table, I felt a swelling pride in my chest that almost made me forget how tense things had been lately. We'd had our share of trouble with neighbors, especially with Mrs. Patricia Mallory, the one everyone in the HOA quietly referred to as Karen. When she wasn't around, a woman in her late 40s with a sharp, permanent scowl, always in some pastel cardigan, who seemed to believe that every square inch of the neighborhood was hers to police. She'd already complained about Lily running too fast down the sidewalk during her training, muttering something about unsafe behavior, but I brushed it off as her usual nitpicking. Patricia always needed something to be upset about, and we'd learned to live with it. Still, as Lily and I walked toward the park that morning, her limp barely noticeable after months of hard work, I noticed Patricia across the street, arms crossed, standing next to her son, Ryan, a tall, broad-shouldered boy of 13 with an air of arrogance that made you wonder if he'd been raised to believe the sun rose just for him, and the look she gave Lily wasn't one of neighborly encouragement but something closer to disdain, as though my daughter's presence in the race was somehow an insult. I told myself to ignore it, focusing instead on the happy chaos of the park. Kids in colorful t-shirts darting around, parents chatting over coffee, the sound of someone's Bluetooth speaker playing upbeat pop songs, and the volunteers from HOA. Checking in runners at a long, folding table, Lily went to warm up with a few gentle stretches, her focus intense, and I hung back near the benches, my eyes sweeping the scene like they always did. Ever since the accident, I couldn't help scanning for potential hazards, for anything that could hurt her again. That's when I caught a brief exchange between Patricia and Ryan, her leaning down, whispering something in his ear, his eyes flicking toward Lily, with a flash of something that didn't sit right with me. Not fear, not amusement, but a sharp, mean sort of interest. The race wasn't for another half hour, but already I felt a strange unease creeping in, a sense that today wasn't going to be the simple, joyful victory I'd imagined. Lily came jogging back, over, cheeks flushed, telling me she'd timed herself in a practice lap and was faster than she'd ever been, and I smiled, telling her how proud I was, but somewhere deep down, a knot was tightening in my stomach, and the first time all morning, I noticed just how many people were watching her, not with admiration, but with that quiet, calculating curiosity that made you wonder what they were waiting for. By the time the race organizers called everyone to the starting line, the sun had climbed higher, the warmth settling over the park in that pleasant way that makes you think the day will stay perfect. Though for me, perfection had already started to crack. I stood near the orange cones marking the course, watching as the runners gathered, Lily slipping easily into the middle of the group, her posture tall and determined despite the faint stiffness in her right leg. While just a few feet away, Patricia positioned Ryan at the very front, her hand on his shoulder like a coach sending her star athlete into battle, leaning in to mutter words I couldn't hear, but could easily imagine something about not letting that girl show him up. My mind flicked back to last week's HOA barbecue when Patricia had made a pointed comment about how certain parents should set realistic limits for their children instead of letting them get big ideas, and though she'd smiled as she said it, the sharpness in her tone had felt like a slap. Now, seeing her glance over at Lily with that same tight-lipped expression, I knew this race meant more to her than it should have. It wasn't just a friendly neighborhood event to her. It was a stage for proving some twisted point. The starter, an older man named Frank who'd been in the HOA forever, stepped forward with a whistle, explaining the rules to the runners. One lap around the park's outer loop, cut through the marked trail, between the tennis courts and the pond, then a final sprint down the straight path to the finish. And as he spoke, I noticed Ryan giving Lily a sidelong look, his eyes narrowing, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth, like he was already imagining how he'd humiliate her. I tried to shake it off, reminding myself it was just kids being competitive, but then one of the other parents, a friend of mine named Marcy, stepped up beside me, her voice low as she said she'd overheard Patricia telling Ryan to make sure she knows her place, and my stomach dropped. It was subtle, but the hostility was there, woven into every little interaction, and I couldn't help scanning the crowd again. Patricia's friends clustered together near the picnic tables, whispering and watching, their heads turning every time Lily moved. The air felt heavier now, each second dragging out as Frank lined everyone up, the runners bouncing lightly on their toes, waiting for the signal. I caught Lily's "I won" last time, giving her an encouraging thumbs up, and she grinned, but there was something else in her face, that quiet steel I'd seen when she'd first learned to walk again after the accident, the refusal to back down even when the odds weren't in her favor. Frank blew the whistle, and they were off, sneakers pounding against the path, the crowd cheering. Though I noticed Patricia didn't clap, she just stood there, her gaze locked on Lily like a hawk tracking prey as the runners rounded. The first bend, Ryan surged ahead, his long legs giving him an early lead, but Lily stayed close, her stride steady, conserving her energy for later, and I could see Patricia's posture shift, her arms crossing tighter, her lips pressing together, as if even the sight of Lily keeping up was somehow offensive. I move along the sideline to get a better view near the pond, my heart thudding harder than it should for a simple community race, and when the runners emerged from the trail, Ryan still in the lead, but Lily only a few feet behind, I caught that same smirk on his face, though this time it looked strained, like he hadn't expected her to be right on his heels. Patricia called out something sharp, her voice cutting across the cheers, and though I couldn't make out the exact words, Lily's jaw tightened as she picked up her pace. I realized then that whatever this was, it wasn't going to stay just about the race. There was a deeper animosity brewing, the kind that didn't care about rules or fairness. And in that moment, the park, with all its bright colors and cheerful noise, felt like a place holding its breath, waiting for something to snap. The final stretch of the race unfolded like something out of a slow-motion film, each second stretching longer than it should, the pounding of feet against the asphalt echoing in my ears as the runners came into view on the straight path toward the finish line. Ryan was still in front, his arms pumping hard. But I could see the telltale signs of fatigue in his shoulders, the slight hitch in his stride, while behind him, Lily's expression was locked in pure focus, her breathing controlled, her pace accelerating with a precision that came from months of disciplined training. The crowd noise swelled as parents and neighbors leaned over the rope barriers, shouting encouragement. But my ears tuned in only to the rhythm of her steps, the steady determination in her eyes, and then, in a moment that made my chest swell with pride, she shifted lanes, cutting just to the right of Ryan with a burst of speed I hadn't seen from her since before the accident. The gap between them closed in. A heartbeat, Ryan glancing over his shoulder in surprise, his smirk faltering into panic, and Patricia's voice rang out sharp and desperate. "Don't you let her pass you." But it was too late. With one final push, Lily surged ahead, her ponytail streaming behind her like a banner, crossing the chalked finish line a full step before Ryan, her arms lifting in a triumphant arc, her face lit with unfiltered joy. I wanted to run to her to scoop her up and tell her she'd just done the impossible, but the moment was shattered by the sound of Patricia's furious footsteps as she stormed across the grass, shoving through the small knot of spectators with a force that startled even the HOA volunteers. Ryan stumbled to a stop, red-faced and panting, muttering something about it not being fair, but Patricia wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were locked on Lily, her face a mask of outrage, cheeks flushed, jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. "You think you can humiliate my son?" She spat, the words dripping with venom that didn't match the cheerful backdrop of the event. And though a few people murmured in protest, no one stepped between them fast. Enough, Lily, still catching her breath, froze, confusion flickering across her features, as if she couldn't quite process why a neighbor, an adult, was speaking to her that way. I started forward, my voice rising to tell Patricia to back off, but in the span of those few seconds, something in her seemed to snap. Her hand shot out, grabbing Lily's shoulder, yanking her toward her, and before I could close the distance, she shoved her forward with a sudden, brutal force, sending her face first toward the pavement. The crack of impact was sickening, sharp enough to cut through the gasps of the crowd, and the sight that followed, Lily crumpled on the ground, blood already blooming across her cheek and lip, her hands twitching weakly as she tried to push herself up, burned itself into my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. People shouted, some rushing toward us, others just frozen in shock, and Patricia's voice rose again, this time louder, angrier, claiming Lily had tripped and wasn't watching where she was going, her tone pitched in that calculated way that made her sound like the reasonable one. But I could see the way her hands still trembled, the way her eyes darted nervously to the onlookers. I dropped to my knees beside Lily, my hands hovering over her as I tried to assess the damage, a deep gash on her cheekbone, swelling already forming, her bottom lip split, and a smear of blood across her chin. And though she was conscious, her voice was small, shaky, and full of pain as she asked what had happened. Someone had already called 911, and in the background I heard the faint wail of sirens growing closer, but all I could focus on was keeping her still, whispering over and over that she was safe now. Even as my own pulse thundered in my ears, Patricia hovered a few feet away, her arms now folded, her expression shifting into something cold and detached, as if she were already rehearsing the version of the story she'd tell the police. And though part of me wanted to scream at her right then, to make her understand the gravity of what she'd done, I knew this wasn't the moment. Right now, the only thing that mattered was getting my daughter the help she needed. When the paramedics arrived, moving with brisk efficiency as they checked Lily's vitals and carefully lifted her onto a stretcher, I caught one of them, giving me a look that told me they'd seen situations like this before, and it made my stomach churn. As they loaded her into the ambulance, I climbed in after her, the doors shutting out the noise of the crowd, but not before I caught a final glimpse of Patricia, standing there in the middle of the park with the summer sun on her face, looking for all the world like a woman who believed she'd done nothing wrong. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't going to end with just an apology. This was the beginning of something much darker. The ride to the hospital felt like it stretched on forever. Even though the sirens and flashing lights carved us a clear path through the streets of Maplewood Springs, the paramedics working quickly but gently over Lily as I sat at her side, clutching her uninjured hand and trying to keep my voice calm, though every time I looked at her swollen, bloodied face, a surge of rage threatened to drown me. She was trembling slightly, shock making her eyes glassy, and every bump in the road made her flinch, her breath catching in tiny gasps that cut through me like knives. But the paramedics kept reassuring me, vitals stable, consciousness steady, though they also hinted at possible fractures and deep tissue bruising that would need scans. When we reached the ER, the doors burst open and a team swept her inside, the bright, sterile lights replacing the warm summer glare of the park, and the beeping monitors and sharp scent of antiseptic made everything feel suddenly terrifyingly real. They moved with efficient urgency, for started gauze pressed to the wounds, x-rays ordered, and I stood back, helpless, answering questions about her medical history, allergies, the accident, though I couldn't stop my voice from tightening when they asked how it happened. My words clipped as I told them my neighbor shoved her face into the pavement. One of the nurses gave me a look, not surprise exactly, but a recognition, as if this wasn't the first time she'd heard such a story, and it made the knot in my stomach twist even tighter. Hours seemed to pass before the scans came back. No fractures, thank God, but a deep laceration along her cheekbone that required over a dozen stitches, severe swelling around her eye, a concussion, and multiple abrasions on her hands and knees from the impact. Lily stayed, quiet through most of it, her little body rigid every time the doctors worked on her, but she gripped my hand so tightly I could feel the tremor in her fingers, and I kept murmuring that she was brave, that she was safe, even though the word safe felt like a lie. When they finally settled her into a hospital bed for overnight observation, I sat by her side, exhaustion pressing heavy on me, my mind running in loops between the image of her crossing the finish line and the sound of her head hitting the ground. It would have been easier if Patricia had just disappeared into the shadows after what she'd done. But no. While Lily was still in treatment, I got a text from Marcy, my friend from the park, warning me that Patricia was already talking to people in the neighborhood, spinning her version of events. That Lily had tripped while trying to show off, and she'd simply been too close when it happened, that my overreaction was an attempt to embarrass her in front of the HOA. The audacity of it made my hands shake, and I realized this wasn't just about the assault anymore. Patricia was setting the stage to protect herself, to make sure she didn't face consequences, and in a community where HOA politics could be as cutthroat as any courtroom, that was dangerous. My anger hardened into something sharper, colder, a resolve that I wouldn't let her rewrite the truth, and as I sat there watching Lily sleep, her face pale, beneath the bruises, I thought of every person who'd been standing there when it happened, every parent who'd seen Patricia's hands on her, and I knew I'd have to convince them to speak up, even if it meant facing the wrath of the most feared woman in our neighborhood. Still, there was an unshakable fear in me, because Patricia wasn't the kind of person who admitted defeat. If anything, her next move would be worse, and as much as I hated to think it, I knew we were about to find ourselves in the middle of a fight that went far beyond a simple race. The morning after the assault, I woke in the stiff hospital chair to the sound of Lily stirring, her small voice asking if she could go home. And while every instinct in me wanted to bundle her up and carry her far away from all of this, the reality was that we were only at the beginning of something bigger and uglier than either of us had ever faced. The doctors cleared her for discharge by mid-morning, giving strict instructions about rest, limited screen time, and watching for concussion symptoms, and as I wheeled her out to the car, I could feel eyes on us, nurses, orderlies, even a police officer near the entrance who paused to glance at the bruises on her face, his jaw tightening before he looked away. Back in the neighborhood, the shift in atmosphere was immediate and suffocating, the usual easy greetings replaced by cautious nods or outright avoidance. And within an hour of being home, Marcy stopped by to fill me in. Patricia had already hosted a gathering at her house the night before, telling her version of the story to anyone who'd listen, sprinkling in just enough fake concern to make herself seem like the victim of an overprotective, dramatic parent. She'd even implied that I'd been looking for trouble with her for months, which wasn't entirely untrue in the sense that I had no tolerance for petty HOA power plays. But now she was twisting that history into a motive, and in a community where appearances meant everything, I could see how her lies might stick. The first real blow came that afternoon when I got a call from Officer Daniels, the local cop assigned to the case, who politely but pointedly mentioned that some witnesses had given conflicting accounts about whether Patricia had actually pushed Lily, and though he didn't say it outright, I could tell he was hinting that without solid proof or more reliable testimony, charges might not hold. That was when the resolve I'd felt in the hospital solidified into a plan. I wasn't going to wait for the truth to magically surface. I was going to drag it into the light myself. I started by making a list of every person who'd been standing near the finish line. Parents, volunteers, even a couple of teenagers who'd been filming on their phones. I called and messaged each one, some answering with hesitant sympathy, others dodging my questions entirely, afraid of getting involved. A phrase that burned in my ears because it meant they were afraid of Patricia. I knew. Why? She was a master at subtle retaliation, finding ways to make life miserable for anyone who crossed her, from reporting them for petty HOA violations to rallying her friends to freeze them out socially. But I also knew there had to be someone willing to tell the truth. The breakthrough came when I spoke to Jenna, a quiet mom who kept mostly to herself but had been volunteering as a race marshal that day. She admitted she'd seen Patricia grab Lily and push her forward, but her voice shook as she explained she didn't want her husband to lose his HOA landscaping contract, a direct source of their income, if Patricia turned the community against them. I told her I understood, but I also reminded her that staying silent meant letting Patricia get away with assaulting a child, and I could hear the conflict in her breathing before she finally said she'd think about it. While I waited on her answer, I turned my attention to the teenagers, two high school boys who'd been filming the race on their phones for Instagram. It took some persuading and a promise not to show their faces, but one of them, Max, finally sent me a shaky, zoomed-in clip from the moment Lily crossed the finish line. The angle was poor, but it clearly showed Patricia lunging toward her, followed by the sickening motion of Lily falling. It wasn't perfect evidence, but it was a start, and as I sat at my kitchen table that night, watching the clip over and over, I felt a grim satisfaction, knowing I had something Patricia couldn't spin. Still, I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight, and sure enough, the next morning, an envelope from the HOA appeared in my mailbox, a formal complaint against me for creating a hostile environment at the community event, signed by Patricia herself and backed by 3 other board members, all of whom were part of her inner circle. It was a blatant intimidation tactic, a warning shot meant to make me back off, but instead it only steeled my determination because now I understood exactly what I was up against. Not just a vindictive neighbor, but a system she controlled, and if I wanted justice for Lily, I'd have to find a way to beat her at her own game. It was 3 days after the race when the first real crack in Patricia's armor appeared, and it came from the last place I expected. Jenna, the quiet mom who'd been too afraid to go on record. She showed up at my door that morning, pale and nervous, glancing over her shoulder before stepping inside. And without sitting down, she told me she couldn't sleep knowing she was letting a lie stand, that she kept seeing Lily's face hit the pavement every time she closed her eyes, and while she was still terrified of what Patricia might do, she decided the truth mattered more. She'd spoken to Officer Daniels directly, giving him a detailed account of what she'd seen, and though she wasn't sure how much it would help, I could see the weight lifting off her shoulders as she told me. That same afternoon, Max, the teenager with the shaky phone footage, messaged me to say he'd found the original higher quality file on his cloud storage, and when he sent it over, my hands, actually, trembled as I watched it. The moment Lily crossed the finish line, Patricia lunging forward, her hand gripping Lily's shoulder, and the violent shove that followed. Undeniable, clear enough that anyone with eyes could see what happened. I immediately made copies, saving them to multiple drives, and then I called Officer Daniels again, this time with a tone that left no room for dismissal. To his credit, he agreed to come by that evening to collect the video, his expression tightening as he watched it. And though he didn't promise an immediate arrest, I could tell the footage had shifted the balance. Word travels fast in Maplewood Springs, and within a day, the whispers began. Parents who'd been silent before were now murmuring in the park about what they'd heard, what they'd seen, and for the first time since the assault, the undercurrent of fear seemed to tilt in my favor. Still, Patricia wasn't retreating. If anything, she was doubling down, calling an emergency HOA, meeting under the guise of addressing recent community tensions, which everyone knew was code for a public attempt to spin the story in her favor. I decided to attend, even though every part of me dreaded walking into that clubhouse filled with her allies, because I knew this might be my only chance to put the truth in front of everyone at once. The night of the meeting, the air was heavy with humidity, thunder rumbling in the distance as neighbors filed into the stuffy, carpeted room, taking seats in the folding chairs arranged in rows. Patricia sat at the head of the long table, flanked by her loyal board members, her expression calm and self-assured, like a queen ready to address her subjects. She opened with a carefully crafted speech about community unity and preventing misunderstandings, painting herself as the target of malicious rumors and suggesting that my accusations were part of a personal vendetta. I let her talk, letting her dig the hole deeper, until she finally opened the floor for comments, clearly expecting no one to challenge her. But I stood, my voice steady as I introduced myself for those who might not know me, then recounted exactly what happened, my words unflinching, describing the sound of Lily's head hitting the pavement, the look on Patricia's face, the fear in my daughter's eyes. Murmurs rippled through the room, and Patricia tried to interrupt, but I raised my voice and told everyone there was no need to argue about what was said or done because I had it on video. I pulled out my laptop, connected it to the projector, and hit play, the grainy but unmistakable footage filling the wall behind me, the room going utterly silent as they watched Patricia's hand shove Lily forward. When the clip ended, I turned to face her, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something break in her expression. Not guilt, not yet, but the realization that the control she'd enjoyed for so long was slipping. A few people clapped quietly, others shifted uncomfortably, but the most telling moment came when one of her own board members cleared his throat and said maybe the HOA should consider an independent review of the incident. Patricia tried to laugh it off, but her voice wavered, and I knew then that she'd felt the shift too. As the meeting adjourned, the storm outside finally broke, rain hammering against the clubhouse windows, and while I walked out into it without an umbrella, drenched in seconds, I felt lighter than I had. In days. Not because the fight was over, but because for the first time, it felt like I might actually win. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions, court hearings, and tense HOA meetings. Each day testing the limits of patience I hadn't realized I still possessed, but slowly, painfully, the scales of justice began to tip in our favor. With Jenna's eyewitness account and Max's video footage presented to both law enforcement and the HOA board, Patricia's carefully constructed facade began to crumble, her allies shifting uneasily as it became clear that the truth could no longer be denied. And the once impervious matriarch of Maplewood Springs now faced inquiries from multiple fronts. Neighbors who had been intimidated by her for years started stepping forward, sharing what they had seen or heard, their courage swelling as Patricia's influence waned. And even the HOA's legal counsel, normally deferential to her, advised swift action to avoid liability, signaling the beginning of her unraveling empire of control. Lily, meanwhile, started physical therapy in earnest, her resilience shining brighter with each session, the bruises on her face slowly fading, but leaving behind a hardened strength in her eyes that told me she had emerged from the ordeal changed yet unbroken, and though every scar and stitch reminded me of that terrifying day, I found comfort in the way she could now smile, without fear, laugh without restraint, and walk without hesitation, reclaiming the freedom Patricia had tried to steal. The neighborhood, once quiet under Patricia's watchful and oppressive gaze, began to breathe again, as if relieved that someone had finally dared to challenge her, neighbors greeting each other with genuine warmth instead of cautious nods, children playing freely in the streets without the looming sense that a tyrant's eyes were tracking their every move. And for the first time since the incident, Maplewood Springs felt like a community rather than a stage for manipulation. Legal proceedings took their course, with Patricia facing charges of assault and public endangerment, alongside multiple HOA violations for abusing her position, the court hearings dragging her reputation through the mud in a way that no amount of past influence could reverse. And when the verdict came down, fines, probation, and an official removal from the HOA board, the relief was almost overwhelming, a tangible weight lifting from the shoulders of everyone who had lived under her tyranny. And even in that public humiliation, she still tried to maintain composure, though the tremor in her voice and the stiffness in her posture betrayed the fact that her power had finally been stripped away. In the quiet of our home, Lily and I sat together one evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, her hand in mine, and we talked about everything she'd endured, the pain, the fear, the unfairness. And as she spoke, I realized that the trauma, while immense, had also forged in her an unshakable inner strength, a fierce determination that would carry her through any obstacle, and I felt a swelling pride knowing that despite the brutality she had faced, she had not allowed fear to define her. Neighbors stopped by, offering small gestures of support, flowers, cards, even notes of apology from those who had once stayed silent. And in every act, I saw the ripple effect of standing up to injustice, how truth, no matter how suppressed, has a way of prevailing, and how courage inspires courage, creating a chain reaction that could reshape an entire community. As the days passed, life slowly returned to a new normal, with Lily attending school, reconnecting with friends, and resuming activities she loved, her laughter once again filling the rooms of our home, but now carrying a depth that spoke of survival, resilience, and triumph over cruelty, while Patricia, stripped of her authority, became an isolated figure in the neighborhood, her attempts to regain control futile against the tide of evidence, witness accounts, and community support that had rallied behind us. I often thought back to the day of the race, to the moment Lily's face met the pavement, and to the weeks of fear and anger that followed, and I understood in a profound way that our battle had never been just about one assault, but about standing up for truth, protecting those who could not protect themselves, and ensuring that cruelty, no matter how powerful it seems, is never allowed to dominate unchecked. And in that realization, I found peace as Lily leaned against me on the couch one rainy evening, whispering that she was proud of us for never giving up. I kissed her forehead, feeling the softness of her hair, the warmth of her presence, and I knew that together we had weathered something that would have broken lesser souls, and that our bond, strengthened by fear, love, and unyielding courage, would endure forever, leaving Patricia's shadows behind as a stark reminder that while evil can strike suddenly and violently, truth, resilience, and the unwavering will of the innocent can ultimately triumph in ways that leave everyone who witnesses it changed, inspired, and undeniably moved.